Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister.
The battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. If we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty. So bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
It's time for Radical Truth with Tony Gurley.
What's the most important factor in determining the best quote-unquote candidate for any government position, especially when you're talking about the President of the United States? That is the question that we're asking and answering in this episode of Radical Truth. And folks, this episode is unique. You have an opportunity to actively participate in it as it takes place. We're going to be playing a couple of games, one at the beginning and one at the end. And it is your job to choose the best quote-unquote candidate for a particular job. You only get to choose one, so choose wisely, and you should be able to tell someone else why you would choose one person over the others, even if you happen to like two. Again, you only get to choose one. The first choice that you have is the best quote-unquote candidate for pastor, that is, of a church. And the candidates that you get to choose from are Franklin Graham, son of famous evangelist Billy Graham. We have author and famous atheist Richard Dawkins, Dr. Richard Dawkins, author of The God Delusion. We have Paul Washer, a famous missionary and preacher. If you do not know who he is, go to YouTube and probably type in shocking youth message or shocking sermons, something like that with youth, and you will see and hear the sermon that made him famous back in the early 2000s. This thing went viral. He became popular very quickly. And we have Ray Comfort, famous evangelist as well. These are your four choices, folks. Only one gets to be pastor of a church. Who would you choose, and why would you choose them? Now, if you're a Christian, there's a good chance you know who all these people are. Other people out there may not have heard of any of these people, so feel free to look them up. Again, we have Franklin Graham, Richard Dawkins, Paul Washer, and Ray Comfort. But again, you have three Christians here, and you have one atheist. Now, if you're voting for the pastor of a church, it should be quite clear, and you were probably asking yourself, why would I vote for an atheist be the pastor of a church? And that should be quite clear to most people, although you'd be surprised at some pastors in churches out there. Now, I'm going to make this easier, of course, just to make this illustration here, and I'm going to swap out Richard Dawkins with Benjamin Watson. He's a professional football player, and he has personally been kicked off interviews on the mainstream media for talking about Jesus. So now we have four Christians here, and the same question is, which one of these people would be the best quote-unquote candidate for the pastor of a church? Now, we're going to move on to game two, but once we talk about it for a couple, it's going to be on pause as we go through some vital information in this episode before we revisit that game, and we'll see how your thoughts may be different or your choice may be different. So the next opportunity that you have to choose is the best quote-unquote candidate for president, and this is of the United States in particular. Here are the candidates who you get to choose from. You only get to choose one. We have Sheriff David Clark. We have Kristi Noem, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. She is the governor of South Dakota. We have Lee Greenwood, and he is obviously the singer of the very popular song, God Bless the USA. Folks, if you didn't see his performance shortly after 9/11, go to YouTube, type in Lee Greenwood World Series, and it'll pull that up. And notice the unification of the people who were there and what was going on after 9/11, and compare that to what's going on today. Great rendition of the song, great performance. Now, your fourth candidate here is Rashida Tlaib, and she is a congresswoman out of Michigan. So folks, here are your four candidates. This, of course, is a hypothetical situation, but all four of these people meet the formal qualifications to be president. The Constitution says that a candidate must be a natural-born American citizen, they must be at least 35 years old, and they must have been a resident of the United States for at least 14 years. Now, just in the first game, where you're choosing a pastor, you're going to have people out there who think, hey, yeah, I'm a Christian, these are all Christians, but I don't like this person for a particular reason, or this person, and it's going to be the same situation here, obviously. When you're looking at these four people, you may be thinking, oh, I like him, I don't like her, or I really like her, or I don't like him, or I love him. Your thoughts are going to be different, and this is going to be the case regardless of what election is taking place, and of course, when it comes to the President of the United States, this is going to be the case as well. Now, not everyone's going to like every personality. They're going to see a quirk here or there in someone. They're going to say, I don't like this person for this particular reason. And sometimes that causes them to not look any further and just not vote for that person, even though they may be the most qualified or might just be the best candidate for one reason or another. Now, here's an example of why this in particular shouldn't be our main concern. And I want to give you a couple examples here. If your house is on fire and you call 911, you want a firefighter to come ASAP. You want that fire to be put out. Now, who is going to call and say, hey, my house is on fire, please send help? And the operator says, okay, we're sending firefighters right now. We have 5 of them on the way. You say, okay, thanks, great. Make sure you don't send any firefighters who are narcissistic, and make sure you don't send any firefighters who've ever told a lie. Yeah, I don't like people like that. Who's going to say that kind of thing? Your main concern is that the fire is put out, right? You don't care about any personal quirks or just personality conflicts or whatever else that you may have with these firefighters. All you want them to do is come and do their job, and obviously you want someone who's qualified to fulfill the job, who knows how to put out fires. That's all that you care about at that point. And it's the same thing when it comes to needing a police officer. If your house is broken into, or if you see a crime in progress that's currently being committed, when you call 911 and you're asking them to send police, you don't say, don't send any police who've ever committed adultery on their spouse. And make sure, most of all, you don't send any police officers who've ever told a joke that's offended someone, a racist joke or anything like that at all. I don't want those type of police officers to come. All you want is a person who's able to fulfill their role to fulfill it. Again, you put personality conflicts aside. Now, when it comes to the President of the United States, personality aside, what are the common roles of every U.S. president, regardless of who the person happens to be? The president must fill a number of different roles at the same time. These roles are Chief of State, Chief Executive, Chief Administrator, Chief Diplomat, Commander-in-Chief, Chief Legislator, Party Chief, and Chief Citizen. Now, if you haven't heard of all those roles, I'm going to go through those very quickly. Chief of State refers to the president as the head of the government. He is the symbol of all the people. In the United States, the president also rules over the government, and the president is also chief executive, vested by the Constitution with broad executive powers. This power is used at home on domestic issues and also extends to foreign affairs. The executive power is limited, however, by our government's system of checks and balances. The next role is Chief Administrator. The president is in charge of the executive branch of the federal government. This branch employs more than 2.7 million civilians. The president is also the nation's chief diplomat, the main author of American foreign policy. Everything the president says and does is closely followed both at home and in other countries, obviously. Third, the Constitution makes the president the commander-in-chief, and this is of the armed forces. The power gives the president direct and immediate control of the military. Also, as chief legislator, the president shapes public policy. The president may suggest, request, and insist that Congress enact laws he believes are needed. Sometimes Congress does not agree with the president and decides against legislation. Working with Congress takes up a major part of the president's time. The president also fills two other roles, chief of party and chief citizen. The president is automatically the chief of party, the leader of the political party that controls the executive branch. Political parties are not mentioned in the Constitution, but they are an important part of government. Finally, the president is chief citizen. This means the president should represent all of the people of the United States. Citizens expect the president to work for their interest and provide moral leadership. Folks, whether you know it or not, these are all of the roles that the president has to fulfill at the same time. And when we come back after the break, we're going to continue on with more vital information which will help you make the right decision. We'll be right back after this.
Hi, I'm Joe Carey with Radical Truth Ministry, helping Christians reach Muslims with the gospel. Many Christians may feel intimidated by so-called radical Muslims and feel there is no hope of salvation for them. Let's focus on the moderate and peaceful Muslims, they will say. Yet it's the idea of radical Muslims that I find very exciting. You see, if we go back about 2,000 years to the days of the early church, we find a man named Saul. When the first Christian martyr Stephen was stoned as recorded in Acts chapter 7, Saul gave hearty approval and continued persecuting the church. He did so thinking he was serving God by ridding the world of this false religion. Who today is primarily doing the same thing? Muslims. Yet Saul had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus and was transformed from the primary persecutor of the early church to one of its greatest messengers. If God can transform Saul to Paul, I believe he can still transform the most radical Muslim today. But only if they hear the gospel. That's where you come into the picture. More tips can be found at our website, radicaltruth.net. I'm Joe Carey for Radical Truth Ministry.
Radical Truth Media presents Understanding Islam, now available on a 5-DVD set and resource disc, 20 hours of apologetics training, covering Introduction to Apologetics to Islam, the Christian and the Great Commission, Islam 101, Basic Beliefs and Practices, Christianity and Islam's Theological Differences, Jihad and Muhammad, the authority of the Bible versus the Quran, Women under Islam, Answering Objections, Sharing the Gospel with Muslims, Do's and Don'ts of Muslim Evangelism. This is one of the very best so far, especially in the way the material is organized, the relevance, and the clear presentation of the Islamic worldview and mindset. Radical Truth presents Understanding Islam, featuring Joe Carey, founder of Radical Truth. For more information, visit www.radicaltruth.net.
Understand that this is a spiritual battle. Muslims are bound up by the enemy. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 and 4, he says, even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the God of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them. These are people whose minds the God of this age has blinded. We're the only ones that can bring them the message that will set them free.
This is Radical Truth with Tony Gurley.
Folks, before the break, we talked about the 8 roles of any U.S. president. We're going to be moving on to the next vital piece of information that you need. Before I do that, I want to encourage you, if you've not done so yet, to visit radicaltruth.net and subscribe to our channel on YouTube and also on BitChute. If you're on YouTube, make sure you hit the bell icon to get notifications about all the new videos that are released. A lot of new videos are going on the YouTube channel, and they're steadily going on the BitChute channel as usual. Also, we have the podcast in iTunes, and guess what? The 20-hour Apologetics to Islam training series is being added to iTunes. I believe 15 hours of it are available right now. You can subscribe for free and download those. Download all of the episodes of Radical Truth, other interviews, and other stuff that's added there as well. Now, what is the most important responsibility? Folks, this is more important than those 8 roles that I already talked about. What's the most important responsibility of any U.S. president? And this major responsibility and the desire or lack thereof to fulfill this responsibility is the measuring rod, which should allow every voter to easily determine the best, quote-unquote, candidate in every election. This major responsibility is mentioned in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. And this is what it says. Before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And there's no mention of public safety. It is the constitutional order that the president is sworn to protect, even if doing so entails risks to the safety and security of the American people. Folks, most of all, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. However, why do many people get distracted by other things, especially in our current election? For example, if you look up online, you will see topics such as coronavirus response, economy and trade, taxes and entitlements, healthcare, voting and government, foreign policy, climate change, and LGBTQ rights. Now, these are certainly important topics, but they're secondary matters. Why is that? Because the majority of countries in the world are also talking about these things as well. But what sets America apart from those countries? What do we have that they don't have? Namely, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, liberty, and justice for all. Now, the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And obviously some of these amendments are more popular or more well known than others. The first one, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people, key word here folks, peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Of course, the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, are the key words there. You have the Third Amendment, no soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. The Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Amendment 5, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment of or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia or in actual service of war or public danger, nor shall any person. It goes on. And of course, we have even more amendments than the 10 that I happen to have here. But again, the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And what is life like in countries that don't have these amendments? In countries where they don't recognize these God-given rights, such as countries under Islamic law. If you don't have any idea what that entails and how that compares to American freedom and the Constitution and Bill of Rights, simply go to the BitChute channel and watch Unveiling the Facts of Sharia. That is a 45-minute to 1 hour presentation on that subject. Very informative, and that piggybacks on the Lights Out presentation and the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, if countries did have some of these things, not necessarily Constitution and Bill of Rights, but they had laws or rights that were given to the people to a degree, what happens when those freedoms are eroded and or are taken away? Let me give you some very recent news stories. We have here Russia's new draft law on freedom of conscience and religious association will make it impossible for pastors trained outside of the Russian Federation to preach in a church or even conduct home Bible study groups. How about in Pakistan? We have U.S. national Tahir Ahmad Nasim, 47, has been in Pakistani custody since 2018, charged under the country's strict blasphemy laws. He stood accused of, quote, defiling the sacred name of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. And this description is in this news story with the title, American Citizen Gunned Down in Pakistan Courtroom During Blasphemy Trial. Moving on to Iran. Iranian court orders the amputation of the fingers of 3 teenagers under Sharia law. We have previously discussed the brutality of Islamic nations enforcing medieval Sharia law. Iran has given the world another shocking addition to the long list of beheadings, floggings, and other forms of Islamic punishment. A court, quote-unquote, has ordered the amputation of the fingers of 3 teenagers found guilty of theft. Photographs released by the country's state news agency in 2013 show the punishment being carried out. In the images, a blindfolded man is led to a crude saw where 2 hooded men put his hand in a vice. How about New Zealand? Ban on most semi-automatic weapons takes effect. This was December 2019. Then in May of 2020, New Zealand government claims it has the authority to extinguish, quote-unquote, property rights of gun owners. And just a month later, in June of 2020, but not surprisingly, this is how it always happens, New Zealand gun crime hits 10-year high after strict gun confiscation. Now, in order to keep America from becoming like these countries, we need to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and Bill of Rights. And again, this is the major responsibility of the President of the United States. And it's important to remember that we should not be asking ourselves which presidential candidate will continue to give me rights, but rather which presidential candidate will best protect my God-given rights. And if we want to protect the documents that our country was founded upon, the most important thing we need to be asking is, where do the presidential candidates stand on issues that directly protect or attack the Constitution? In other words, where do they stand on religious freedom, freedom of speech, gun rights, not gun control, gun rights, personal liberty in general, and criminal justice, which are spotlighted in the Bill of Rights. So no matter which election you're going to be voting in, the main question is which candidate is more likely to do this. Not change the Constitution, not reinterpret the Constitution. The question is who will preserve, protect, and defend our founding documents, and specifically the original intent and interpretation of the founders themselves. In other words, people need to realize the difference between reader response and authorial intent. Authorial intent is what a person meant when they wrote something. A reader response is how you may personally, subjectively interpret what they wrote. If you don't have those two things line up, you have a misinterpretation or a mistranslation, a misunderstanding, if nothing else. If you haven't seen it, folks, go and watch episode 14 called America's Founders, Theists, Deists, or Atheists, because this explains the viewpoint of the founders themselves. Now, with all that's been said, and with any new insight that you've received in this episode about the most important responsibility of any potential U.S. president, it's time to get back to our game of who is the best candidate for president. But before we get to that, let's read the promise that every new president needs to make at the time of inauguration in reference to their most important responsibility. I, blank, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I'm about to enter. So help me God. Now, if the original intent of America's founders is what that promise is in reference to, then some of you are probably thinking, there's one person here who I don't trust would fulfill that promise based on that person's track record. Now, I don't want to say who because I may hurt Rashida's feelings. Instead, make sure you go and watch or listen to Lights Out When Islam Rules America, which was episode 10 of the Radical Truth TV show and podcast. And even more, watch the full 1-hour presentation called Lights Out When Islam Rules America. Of course, follow that up by watching the Muslim Brotherhood Origin, Identity, and Agenda to learn more about Rashida and the rest of the squad. Now, for all of you who have already watched those presentations, I'm going to make the game even harder by substituting Rashida Tlaib for Alveda King. Now, I know some of you out there thinking, okay, great, now I don't know who to choose. So I'm going to leave that on you, and we will talk with you next time on Radical Truth.